My name was Raymond Caldwell. I was 68 years old, a retired electrical engineer, and I was sitting in a nursing home conference room I never asked to be in. The table was long and glossy. The lights hummed faintly above us. My daughter sat across from me, shoulders straight, voice calm, too calm. "Dad wanders at night," Melissa said. "He gets confused. Sometimes he doesn't know where he is." The administrator nodded with practiced sympathy. A social worker slid a stack of papers across the table. The sound made my stomach tight. Paperwork like that never meant anything good. No one looked at me. I studied Melissa instead. She spoke carefully, choosing words that sounded loving while cutting something vital out of me. She never once met my eyes, not when she talked about my safety, not when she talked about supervision, not when she talked about decisions being made for me. That was when the humiliation settled in, quiet, heavy, familiar, but beneath it came something else. A slow, steady anger, the kind that thinks instead of shouts. As they discussed alarms and monitoring, my mind drifted to my house, to the doorbell camera I'd installed years earlier, the one feature I'd insisted on paying extra for, audio recording. Melissa thought I was losing my mind. What she forgot was that I'd spent 40 years designing systems that don't lie. My daughter said I wandered at night. The room believed her. That was the moment I understood how quickly a man could disappear without leaving his chair. I sat at the end of the conference table, hands folded, back straight, listening as if I were a case study instead of a person. The nursing home's conference room smelled like lemon cleaner and old carpet. The lights buzzed faintly overhead. Across from me sat my daughter, Melissa, calm and composed, dressed like she was showing a house instead of dismantling her father's independence. "Dad gets confused after dark," she said softly. "Sometimes he thinks he's still at home." The administrator nodded, pen moving across a yellow legal pad. A social worker glanced at me briefly, then back to Melissa like eye contact might complicate things. I didn't interrupt, not because I couldn't, but because I wanted to hear how far she planned to go. Melissa continued, voice full of concern. "We're worried about his safety. Wandering is dangerous at his age." At his age. I was 68, not 88. I drove myself here. I balanced my own checkbook. I remembered every circuit diagram I'd ever drawn, but none of that mattered once the word confused entered the room. A packet slid across the table toward the administrator. I recognized the tone of the conversation shifting. Less discussion, more procedure. "We may need to recommend increased supervision," the administrator said carefully. "Possibly a nighttime alarm. And a competency evaluation just to be safe." Just to be safe. Melissa nodded, lips pressed together like she was holding back tears. She was good at that, always had been. I watched her closely then. She never looked at me, not once, not when they talked about restricting my movements, not when they discussed my finances eventually. Her eyes stayed on the table, on the papers, on the professionals who were now deciding my future. That told me everything. I felt the humiliation first. It came quietly like a draft under a closed door. Being talked about instead of talked to does that to a man, makes him smaller without touching him. But humiliation didn't last long. Under it came anger, slow, controlled, familiar. The kind that had carried me through decades of debugging failed systems and fixing mistakes other people swore didn't exist. They talked for another 20 minutes. Alarms, monitoring, reports. Melissa answered every question before it reached me. I stayed silent, memorizing details instead, the scrape of pens, the way the administrator avoided my eyes, the confidence in my daughter's voice. Finally, the meeting ended. "We'll follow up," the administrator said kindly. "This is about care." Melissa stood and touched my shoulder, light as a stranger. "This is for your own good, Dad." I nodded. That seemed to satisfy everyone. Back in my room, I sat on the edge of the bed and stared at the wall. The quiet felt heavier than the meeting had. That was when my mind drifted somewhere unexpected, not to the nursing home, not to my daughter, but to my front porch. To the house I'd lived in for 32 years, to the doorbell camera I'd installed myself. The one feature I'd insisted on paying extra for, audio recording. I smiled then, just a little, because Melissa thought I was losing my mind. What she forgot was that I'd spent 40 years designing systems that don't lie. Once they think you're confused, everything you say sounds like proof. That lesson settled in fast. The morning after the meeting, things were different, subtle at first. A nurse knocked instead of letting herself in, then wait. At an extra beat like she expected me to be asleep or disoriented. Another spoke slower than usual, smiling too much, asking if I knew what day it was. I answered correctly. She wrote something down anyway. Doors that had always been unlocked were suddenly closed at night. My room keycard stopped working after 10. "Just a temporary safety measure," they said. I noticed how often that phrase came up. Temporary, safety, best interest. I took a walk down the hallway after dinner, the same route I'd taken every evening since I arrived. Halfway to the lounge, an aide stepped in front of me. "Mr. Caldwell," she said gently, "where are we headed?" I pointed. "The window at the end, I like the view." She nodded, walked me there, then walked me back, escorted, like a child. By lunchtime the whispers started, not loud enough to hear clearly but loud enough to feel. Staff glanced at me, then at each other. One of them asked another if I was the wanderer. That word stuck. Melissa visited that afternoon right on schedule. She always knew the schedule now, when meals were, when activities happened, when visitors were allowed. She carried a folder this time tucked under her arm. "I spoke to the administrator," she said, sitting across from me. "We're just going to tighten things up a little." I raised an eyebrow. "Tighten what?" She smiled patiently. "Your routine. Too much stimulation isn't good for you." For me, she told me when my son Ethan could visit. She canceled a lunch with my neighbor Frank because it wasn't a good day. She spoke to staff in the hallway like she belonged there, like this place was an extension of her authority. I watched it happen without reacting. That night I asked a nurse for a glass of water after hours. "Let me check," she said. "Check with whom?" Melissa called the next morning. "I heard you were up late," she said casually. "See, this is what I'm talking about." I hadn't left my bed. I began to understand then how reputations were built, not on facts but on repetition. Say something often enough, say it kindly enough, and people stop questioning it. I tested it once. At breakfast I said, "I think someone else been going through my drawers." The aide stiffened, smiled. "Why would you think that, Mr. Caldwell?" I shrugged, "Just a feeling." She wrote something down. That was when I stopped talking. Instead I watched, I listened. I noted times, names, patterns. Melissa wasn't just concerned, she was organizing, laying bricks, setting a foundation for what I didn't know yet, but I knew one thing for certain. You don't build this kind of story unless you plan to use it, and whatever she was preparing for, it wasn't about my safety, it was about control. She thought I'd forgotten my own front porch. Melissa said it casually, like it was already established fact. I heard it from a nurse first. It tried to sound neutral, but curiosity leaked through. "Your daughter mentioned you were seen near your old house late one night," she said. "Do you remember that?" I looked at her, calm, steady. "No," I said, "that was the truth. I hadn't been anywhere near my house. But Melissa wanted people to believe I thought I had. That night, lying in my narrow bed, I thought about the porch she claimed I'd wandered onto. The chipped white railing I'd repainted twice. The loose board near the steps I always meant to fix. The place where I'd stood for decades, coffee in hand, watching the neighborhood wake up. I remembered it perfectly. I remembered the afternoon I installed the smart doorbell, too. Melissa had laughed when I told her about it. "Dad, you don't need all that tech," she'd said. "You're not exactly a hacker." I hadn't argued, I just installed it anyway. I'd spent 40 years as an electrical engineer designing systems for factories and power stations. Redundancy mattered, verification mattered. If something happened, I wanted a record that didn't rely on memory, mine or anyone else's. So I chose a doorbell camera with video, motion detection, and audio recording. Paid extra for extended cloud storage. Set the sensitivity myself. Tested it until I was satisfied. Melissa never knew the details. She never asked. According to her story, I'd wandered back to the house at night, confused, rattling the door like I expected to be let in. She told the administrator it was only a matter of time before I hurt myself. The problem with that story was simple. If I'd been there, the camera would have recorded it. The next morning, Melissa visited again. She brought pastries this time, like sugar could soften what she was doing. "I talked to Frank," she said, stirring her coffee. "He said he thought he saw you one night near the sidewalk." Frank was my neighbor, 72, sharp as a tack and not easily confused. "That's interesting," I said. She smiled, relieved. "See, that's what I mean, you don't remember." I let it go. Let her believe she'd planted another brick in her wall after. She left. I asked to use the phone at the nurse's station. It took longer than it should have. Everything did now. Frank answered on the second ring. "Ray," he said, "you okay?" "I am," I said. "I need a favor. Name it. Can you do me a kindness and check my doorbell camera footage?" I asked. "Specifically the nights Melissa's been talking about." Frank snorted softly. "Already did," he said. "Didn't see you, but I did see something else." My grip tightened on the phone. "What?" I asked. "Your daughter," he said, "standing on your porch talking to someone late." The line went quiet. "Frank," I said slowly, "does that camera record sound?" He laughed. "You installed it, of course it does." I closed my eyes. Melissa thought I'd forgotten my house. What she didn't realize was that my house remembered everything. I heard my daughter's voice where mine was supposed to be. Frank brought the tablet with him when he visited 2 days later. He looked uncomfortable in the nursing home lounge, like a man who didn't trust places where time slowed down on purpose. He set the tablet between us without a word and tapped the screen. "There," he said, "that's the night she mentioned." The video showed my front porch under a dull yellow light, empty at first, then movement. A familiar figure stepped into frame. Melissa. Her hair was pulled back, coat collar turned up. She glanced over her shoulder before stepping closer to the door. She didn't knock. She spoke. The audio was clear, too clear. Make sure everything's ready, she said, her voice low. Dad's not thinking straight lately. Another voice answered, male, tired, Daniel, her husband. This feels wrong, he said. What if he figures it out? Melissa laughed quietly, not the laugh she used in front of staff. This one was sharp, efficient. He won't, she said. Everyone already thinks he's confused. My chest tightened, but I didn't stop the recording. They talked about paperwork, about meetings, about timing. Melissa explained how she'd told the nursing home staff I wandered at night, how she'd told them I was fixated on the house. It's believable, she said. Old men do this kind of thing all the time. Daniel hesitated. What about the will? There was a pause, then Melissa spoke again, slower now. That's why we need control before he changes it. The words landed harder than anything else I'd heard. She talked about competency, about doctors, about how easy it was to sound concerned if you used the right language. She sounded prepared, rehearsed, then she practiced. Dad didn't remember where he was, she said softly, like she was trying out the sentence. He kept asking to go home. Daniel responded weakly. That sounds bad. That's the point, she replied. Say it enough times and it becomes true. I felt something shift inside me then, not shock, not heartbreak, clarity. This wasn't panic, it wasn't fear, it was a plan. The recording ended. Frank didn't look at me, he didn't need to. Ray, he said quietly, you want me to make copies? Yes, I said. My voice was steady. I was proud of that. He nodded. Already did. When he left, I sat alone with the hum of the room and the low murmur of a television down the hall. I replayed the words in my head, each one sharp and undeniable. Before he changes the will, I understood now why Melissa controlled my schedule, why she spoke for me, why she rushed this story along. She wasn't protecting me, she was racing me. That night, a nurse asked if I needed help sleeping. No, I said, I'm fine. She smiled politely and wrote something down. I lay awake anyway, staring at the ceiling, thinking about systems, about inputs and outputs, about how lies collapsed when enough data was applied. Melissa thought intent mattered, but audio didn't care about intent. It only cared about truth, and the truth was finally speaking. They were racing a clock I didn't know existed. That thought stayed with me all night, ticking louder the more I replayed Melissa's voice in my head. Before he changes the will, she said it like a deadline, like something was slipping through her fingers. The next morning, I asked the front desk if I could review my personal documents. They hesitated. Then they called Melissa. That told me enough. When the folder finally arrived, it was thinner than I remembered. My state documents were there, copies of my will, power of attorney, healthcare directive, all familiar, all unchanged. I knew every clause because I'd written them with care years ago after my wife passed. 50% split evenly between my children. The house to be sold, proceeds divided, simple, fair, unaltered, which raised the question, why the rush? I flipped through the pages slowly, letting my fingers rest on the margins. Dates checked out, signatures intact, but there were notes clipped to the back. Recent ones, requests. Melissa's name appeared more than once. Inquiries about capacity, questions ob. Out updates, a formal letter requesting information on whether I'd shown signs of cognitive decline. My stomach tightened. She hadn't waited for proof. She'd started the paper trail first. I asked a nurse who authorized the requests. She gave me a sympathetic smile and said, your daughter was just being proactive. Proactive. That afternoon, a social worker stopped by my room. Friendly, professional. She asked me simple questions. What day was it? Who was the president? Did I know where I was? I answered everyone without hesitation. She nodded satisfied, but I noticed she still checked a box at the bottom of the form. Further review recommended. Melissa had already planted the doubt. The questions were just formalities. I thought about all the times I'd helped my kids with homework, with wiring problems, with life. How I'd taught Melissa to drive, how proud she'd been when she passed her test on the first try. Somewhere along the way, she decided I was no longer a person, just an obstacle. That evening, Frank called. She's been back at the house, he said, twice this week. Alone, I asked. Not always. I closed my eyes. I could picture her walking through rooms that were still mine, measuring, planning, deciding. I needed help, real help, not the kind that smiled and wrote notes. I waited until after dinner when the hallways were quieter. Then I asked to use the phone again. This time I didn't ask permission. I just asked for privacy. The lawyer answered on the third ring. Marjorie Klein, she said. My name is Raymond Caldwell, I replied. I believe my daughter is attempting to declare me incompetent in order to control my estate. There was a pause, not disbelief, interest. Can you support that claim? She asked. Yes, I said, and I have recordings. Another pause, longer this time. Mr. Caldwell, she said carefully, I think we should meet. I hung up the phone and sat back on the bed, heart steady, mind clear. Melissa thought I'd never changed my will because I couldn't. The truth was simpler. I hadn't changed it because I hadn't needed to yet, and now the clock was mine too. I stopped correcting people. I started listening. That decision changed everything. The next time Melissa visited, I let my shoulders slump a little. I asked the same question twice. I pretended to forget the name of the nurse who brought my lunch every day. Each mistake earned me a look of quiet satisfaction from my daughter, like she was watching a plan fall neatly into place. "See," she said gently, patting my hand. "This is why I worry." I nodded. I let her worry out loud. Once she believed I was slipping, she talked more freely. She filled the silence with explanations I hadn't asked for. She started answering questions no one had raised. "It's just temporary," she said during one visit, adjusting the throw pillow beside her. "Once everything's settled, things will be easier." "What things?" I asked. She smiled, indulgent. "The house, the paperwork, you don't want to deal with that now." I looked down at my hands, pretending to study them. "The house is paid off," I said slowly. "Isn't it?" Her eyes flickered just for a moment. "Yes," she said, "but the equity is tied up, and Daniel's business has been strained." There it was, she sighed, like she'd been carrying this burden alone. "We just need access for a little while. To stabilize things." "To stabilize what?" I asked. "Our future," she said too quickly. She talked herself into a corner after that, about refinancing, about how much the house was worth now compared to when I bought it, about how unfair it was that money just sat there while her family struggled. "You don't even use it anymore," she added, gesturing vaguely. "It's just sitting empty." I said nothing. She leaned forward. "Dad, wouldn't you want to help your daughter?" That question used to work on me. It didn't anymore. I let my gaze drift, let my mouth stay slightly open. Let her believe she was convincing me. Behind my calm, my mind cataloged everything, the admissions, the numbers, the shift from concern to entitlement. When she left, she kissed my cheek. "Get some rest," she said. "Big day tomorrow." I waited until the door closed. Then I reached into my drawer and took out my phone. Marjorie Klein had been very clear. As long as I was part of the conversation and consented, recording was legal. I'd checked the laws myself, twice. I hit play on the recorder and listened to Melissa's voice from earlier that afternoon. Clear, unfiltered, greedy. I labeled the file with the date and time, backed it up to the cloud, sent a copy to Marjorie. From that point on, every visit became data. Melissa talked, I listened. She planned, I recorded. She believed she was winning because I was quiet. What she didn't understand was this: silence isn't surrender. Sometimes it's strategy. And while she rushed toward the finish line, I was building a case she'd never see coming. T. Long game had begun. Betrayal hurts worse when it's silent. Ethan came on a Tuesday afternoon wearing his work boots and the same tired jacket he'd owned for years. My son had always looked like a man carrying more weight than he admitted. That day was no different. Melissa was already there. She greeted him warmly, all smiles and concern, immediately launching into an update about my rough week. She talked about sleep patterns, confusion, safety, words she'd perfected. Ethan listened, nodded. Didn't look at me. I waited for a question, a glance. Anything that said he still saw his father sitting right there. It didn't come. "Well," Ethan said finally, shifting his weight, "if the doctors think it's best." He didn't finish the sentence. Melissa touched his arm. "Thank you," she said softly. "This is hard for everyone." I felt something crack then, not loudly, not all at once, but deep enough to hurt. Ethan had always been the quieter one, the peacemaker. But silence has consequences, and that silence landed squarely on me. After a few minutes, Melissa checked her watch. "I have a call," she said. "I'll be right back." She left the room, the door closed. Ethan finally looked at me. "I'm sorry," he said under his breath. "For what?" I asked. He rubbed his face with both hands. "For not saying anything." I studied him. "Why didn't you?" He hesitated, then spoke quickly, like he was afraid he'd lose his nerve. "Because she's already told people you're declining, and if I push back publicly, it just makes it look like denial." "So you let her say it," I replied. "Yes," he said, "but I didn't believe it. That mattered, not enough to undo the damage, but enough to keep listening." "She's moving fast, Dad," Ethan continued. "Faster than she's telling you." I leaned back slightly. "How fast?" "There's talk of a competency hearing," he said. "She's been asking lawyers what it takes, what kind of documentation, what doctors matter." The words hit harder than I expected, even though I'd seen it coming. "When?" I asked. "Soon," Ethan said. "Weeks, maybe less." I nodded slowly. "And you're telling me this now because I saw paperwork on her kitchen counter," he said. "Drafts, forms, she doesn't know I saw them." He finally met my eyes fully this time. "Dad, I don't think she's doing this for you." "No," I said quietly, "she is." We sat in silence for a moment, not the painful kind, the honest kind. "I don't know how to stop her," Ethan admitted. "Every time I try to question her, she says I'm being emotional or that I don't understand." "You don't need to stop her," I said. "You just need to stay out of her way." He frowned. "What do you mean?" I smiled faintly. "It means I'm already ahead of her." Footsteps sounded in the hallway. Melissa returned, cheerful as ever. "Everything okay in here?" she asked. Ethan nodded. "Yeah, we were just talking." "Good," she said brightly. "Dad needs rest." She was right about one thing. I did need rest, because now I knew the timeline, and I knew exactly what she planned to take from me next. The competency hearing wasn't a rumor anymore, it was the next move. They brought opinions, I brought data. Marjorie Klein didn't look like someone who wasted time. Mid-60s, gray hair cut sharp at the jaw, glasses she didn't peer over, she looked straight through them. When she entered the small conference room at her office, she didn't start with sympathy, she started with facts. "Mr. Caldwell," she said, setting her briefcase down, "show me what you have." Frank helped set up the laptop. I watched Marjorie's face as the first audio file played. Melissa's voice filled the room, calm and calculated, discussing my confusion like it was a marketing strategy. Marjorie didn't interrupt, she didn't react, she listened. Then she asked for the next file, and the next. Each recording had a timestamp. Each one matched Melissa's documented visits, porch audio, conversations, admissions, numbers, intent, planning. She knew exactly what she was doing, Marjorie said finally. Not angry, clinical. She opened a folder and began matching audio files to printed transcripts Frank had helped prepare, highlighting phrases, writing notes in the margins, drawing lines between dates. "This one," she said, tapping a page, "is especially damaging." "That's the night she mentioned the will," I replied. "Yes," Marjorie said, "and that matters." She explained it plainly: intent, coercion, pattern of behavior, false reports made to influence medical and legal determinations. Each one on its own might be explained away. Together they form something much uglier. "This isn't just a family disagreement," she said. "This is a coordinated attempt to deprive you of autonomy and property." I nodded. I'd already come to that conclusion. Hearing it from someone else made it solid. She pulled out another document. "Your daughter filed written concerns about your mental fitness." She said, but she did so before any medical confirmation. "Can she do that?" I asked. "She can file," Marjorie said. "What she can't do is fabricate evidence to support it." She leaned back slightly. "Mr. Caldwell, this looks like fraud and coercion." The words landed heavy, not frightening, just final. "I don't want revenge," I said. "I want my life back." "That's usually how this starts," she replied. She explained the next steps. A formal review meeting with the nursing home administration. Presentation of evidence. Request for independent medical evaluation, one Melissa couldn't influence. Documentation sent to the appropriate legal bodies. And the competency hearing, I asked. Marjorie smiled thinly. "If she pushes for one now, it won't go the way she thinks." She closed the folder and met my eyes. "People who rely on stories don't expect files like yours." Before I left, she scheduled the meeting. Date, time, names, everything precise. As I stood to go, she added one last thing. "Don't confront your daughter," she said. "Let her keep talking." I nodded. "She will." Back at the nursing home, Melissa called that evening, cheerful, curious. "How was your outing?" she asked. "Productive," I said. She laughed softly. "I'm glad." I hung up and sat quietly for a long moment. Melissa believed this was still about opinions, about who sounded more convincing. She had no idea what was coming, because opinions fade. But data doesn't, and for the first time since this began, I wasn't reacting anymore. I was ready to present my case. Melissa cried for the room, not for me. The meeting took place in the same nursing home conference room, but this time the table was crowded. An administrator sat at the head. A social worker and nurse manager took notes. A legal consultant observed quietly, hands folded. Too many people deciding my life. Melissa arrived early, dressed carefully in a pale blue sweater that softened her sharp edges. She placed a packet of tissues on the table before she even sat down. When she spoke, her voice trembled just enough to sound sincere. "I'm just worried about my dad," she said, dabbing her eyes. "He doesn't realize how much he's changed. Nights are especially hard for him." The administrator nodded sympathetically. "You've been very attentive," she said. Melissa sighed. "I try. It's not easy watching someone you love slip away." I sat at the far end of the table, hands folded, silent. That was the role she'd assigned me, the quiet proof of her story. They talked about wandering, about safety protocols, about possible evaluations. Each sentence stacked neatly on the last, forming a version of me I barely recognized. No one asked when they'd actually seen me wander. No one asked how I felt. Then Marjorie Klein spoke. "Before we go further," she said evenly, "has Mr. Caldwell undergone an independent cognitive evaluation?" Melissa hesitated. "Not yet. We're arranging, so all concerns," Marjorie continued, "are based on family reports." The room shifted. The administrator turned toward me. "Mr. Caldwell," she said kindly, "how do you feel about what your daughter has shared?" Every head turned. Melissa's smile tight. She hadn't planned for this. I took a breath. "I appreciate the concern," I said slowly. "Truly, but there's information missing from this conversation." Melissa laughed softly. "Dad, this is confusing for you. May I play something?" I asked. Silence. The administrator frowned. "Play what?" "A recording," I said. "From my house. It relates directly to these concerns." Melissa stiffened. "That's not necessary." Marjorie met the administrator's eyes. "The recordings are legally obtained, time-stamped, and relevant." After a long pause, the administrator nodded. All right. Frank handed Marjorie the tablet. Melissa's face drained of color as the screen lit up. No, she said quietly. That's private. Marjorie pressed play. My daughter's voice filled the room, clear, confident, unguarded. I just need control before he changes the will. No crying, no concern, just calculation. The room froze. I didn't look at Melissa. I watched the others, the administrator's eyebrows lift, the social worker's pen stop mid-word, the legal consultant lean forward. The audio continued, talk of paperwork, of timing, of how easy it was to make concern sound real. When the recording ended, the silence was unbearable. Melissa whispered, "That's out of context." Marjorie closed the tablet. Context is exactly what this provides. For the first time, no one rushed to comfort my daughter. The administrator cleared her throat. "We'll need to reassess," she said carefully. Melissa stared at the table, hands clenched. I sat back in my chair, heart steady. The truth had finally entered the room, and it wasn't leaving. My daughter's voice filled the room. It sounded different in that space, sharper, stripped of warmth, impossible to soften. The recording didn't care who she was or how she'd presented herself 5 minutes earlier. It just played the truth. "I've already told them he wanders," Melissa's voice said calmly. "Once it's in the file, they won't question it." A chair creaked as someone shifted. The nurse manager stopped writing. The audio continued. "We just need the evaluation to go through," she said. "After that, everything's easier. The house, the accounts, all of it." The word house echoed louder than the rest. I watched the administrator's face change, not dramatically but decisively. Sympathy drained away, replaced by calculation, process, liability. Marjorie didn't interrupt. She let the recording do what it was designed to do. Each sentence stacked on the last, building something solid and undeniable. Daniel's voice appeared next. Uneasy, hesitant. "Are you sure this is legal?" Melissa laughed. "It's not illegal to be concerned." The social worker lowered her pen. Another clip played. "Different night, same porch. He doesn't remember conversations anymore," Melissa said. "You just repeat things until he agrees." I felt my jaw tighten, but I stayed still. The room was no longer leaning toward her. When the final recording ended, the silence was absolute. No murmurs, no sympathetic noises, just the quiet realization that everyone had been misled. The administrator cleared her throat. "Ms. Caldwell," she said carefully, "these statements are troubling." Melissa looked up sharply. "They're private conversations." "They involve allegations made to our staff," Marjorie replied, "and they suggest intent." The legal consultant finally spoke. "Intent to influence medical and administrative decisions." Melissa's face lost its color. "That's not what this is," she said quickly. "You don't understand the pressure I'm under." The nurse manager folded her hands. "Pressure doesn't explain false reports." Marjorie leaned forward then, voice calm but firm. "These recordings establish a pattern of manipulation, misrepresentation, and financial motivation." Melissa shook her head. "This is a misunderstanding." "No," Marjorie said, "this is documentation." The administrator turned to me. "Mr. Caldwell," she said, her tone entirely different now, "we owe you an apology." I nodded once. I didn't trust myself to speak yet. Melissa stood abruptly. "You're all overreacting," she snapped. "He's confused. This proves nothing." Marjorie met her gaze. "It proves enough to halt any competency proceedings initiated by your statements." Melissa's mouth opened, closed, and, Marjorie continued, "it raises serious concerns about coercion and attempted financial control." That was when Melissa's hands began to shake. The administrator pushed her chair back slightly. "Effective immediately," she said, "all reports regarding Mr. Caldwell's cognition will be reevaluated by an independent party." Melissa whispered, "You can't do this." Marjorie didn't raise her voice. "We already are." I leaned back in my chair, the weight finally shifting off my chest. For weeks, Melissa had controlled the story. Now the story had receipts. As the meeting adjourned, people avoided my daughter's eyes. No one offered tissues. No one followed her out. She stood frozen at the table, pale and exposed. And for the first time since this began, she understood something she'd forgotten. Systems don't care who you are, they only care what you record. The word landed harder than any apology. Competent, the doctor said it plainly, without drama, without softness. Just a fact delivered across a desk stacked with files that had once been used to question my existence as an adult. "Mr. Caldwell is fully oriented," she continued. "Memory intact. Judgment sound, no evidence of cognitive decline." She checked a box and signed her name. I watched Melissa's reflection in the glass cabinet behind the doctor. She didn't argue, she didn't cry. She just stared like someone watching a door close that she'd already stepped through. The evaluation hadn't taken long. Simple questions, complex ones, scenarios, logic puzzles. The kind I used to design for trainees when I was still working. I answered calmly, carefully, refusing to rush even when I knew the answers instantly. There was no satisfaction in proving myself, only relief. The administrator thanked the physician and gathered the papers. "We'll be updating Mr. Caldwell's file immediately," she said. "There will be no further restrictions unless medically indicated." Melissa shifted in her chair. "This doesn't change my concerns," she said. "It changed everything." Marjorie spoke next. "Given the findings, any prior reports suggesting confusion will be flagged and reviewed." The legal consultant nodded, including the source of those reports. Melissa's head snapped up. "What does that mean?" "It means," Marjorie said evenly, "that knowingly submitting false or misleading information to influence medical or legal outcomes is a serious matter." I saw. The moment Melissa realized this had moved beyond family, beyond control, beyond her, the administrator folded her hands. "We're required to document today's findings and forward concerns to the appropriate oversight bodies." Melissa stood abruptly. "You're punishing me for caring." "No," the administrator replied. "We're correcting a record." I stayed silent, letting professionals do what I'd been denied for weeks, listen to evidence instead of emotion. Later that afternoon, Marjorie and I sat alone in my room. "It's done," she said. "You're officially deemed competent, no ambiguity." I nodded. "And Melissa?" "She's been reported," Marjorie said. "Not criminally yet, but formally. Any further attempts will be scrutinized." She paused. "There's something else." I waited. "Given the attempted coercion," she said, "control over your estate is temporarily suspended from any external influence. No changes, no access, no proxy decisions." The word settled slowly, suspended. Melissa couldn't touch anything now, not the house, not the accounts, not the future she'd already started spending. "When does that change?" I asked. "When you decide," Marjorie said. That night Melissa didn't visit. No calls, no messages, no dramatic texts about betrayal or misunderstanding, just silence. For the first time since this began, the silence felt earned. I sat by the window and watched the parking lot lights flicker on as dusk settled. Nurses moved between buildings. Life continued, indifferent to schemes and paperwork. I thought about how close I'd come to losing everything without ever raising my voice. How easily a lie could grow legs if no one stopped it. Competent, the word echoed again, steady and immovable. It didn't give me back what was taken, but it gave me something better, control. I changed it because I could, not because I was angry. That distinction mattered to me. Anger makes mistakes. Clarity makes decisions. Marjorie and I sat across from each other in a quiet office 2 days later. Sunlight filtered through half-closed blinds, striping the table between us. She slid my estate folder forward, the same one Melissa had been so eager to control. "Nothing here is rushed," Marjorie said. "You're not obligated to change a thing." "I know," I replied, "but I want it to reflect reality." She nodded once and opened the file. We went through everything carefully: the house, the accounts, investments I'd forgotten I even had. She explained options, consequences, protections. No pressure, no urgency, just facts. I removed Melissa as executor. That part was simple. Marjorie paused before writing it in. "You're certain?" "Yes, being executor required trust, and trust, once broken, didn't regenerate just because blood demanded it. I left the inheritance amounts unchanged for now. That wasn't mercy, it was restraint. I wanted no one to say this was done in revenge. The will would speak clearly without emotion clouding it. When we finished, Marjorie leaned back. "This document protects you," she said, "and it sends a message." "I'm done sending messages," I replied. "I just want peace." She smiled faintly. "That's usually when people finally hear them." Melissa confronted me that evening. She waited until the hallway outside my room was empty. No witnesses, no audience. Her confidence was gone, replaced by something brittle. "You really did it," she said. "You cut me out." "I removed you as executor," I corrected. "You're not entitled to control my life." She laughed, sharp and humorless. "After everything I've done for you," I looked at her, really looked. She seemed smaller somehow, cornered by consequences she never planned for. "You told people I was confused," I said. "You tried to take my autonomy." "I was trying to help," she snapped. "No," I said calmly. "You were trying to hurry." Her eyes filled with tears, but they didn't move me this time. "You're punishing me," she said. "I'm protecting myself." She stepped closer. "If Mom were alive, don't," I said quietly. She stopped. "I didn't change my will because I was angry," I continued. "I changed it because I'm competent and because I can." That seemed to land harder than anything else. She searched my face for hesitation, for guilt, for weakness. She found none. "This isn't over," she said. I nodded. "No, it's just no longer in your hands." She walked away without another word. I sat back on my bed, heart steady, breathing slow. For the first time, the future felt like something I could approach without bracing for impact. The will wasn't a weapon, it was a boundary, and boundaries, I was learning, didn't need anger to hold. They just needed truth. And the truth was this: my life was finally my own again. But I knew one thing for certain. Melissa wouldn't accept that quietly, and whatever she did next, she'd do it alone. She wanted forgiveness. She asked too late. Melissa came back 3 days after the will was rewritten. No W. Arning this time, no audience, just her standing in my doorway, eyes red, confidence stripped down to something raw and uncertain. "Can we talk?" she asked. I nodded and sat across from her, leaving space between us. Space had become important. She didn't start with anger. That surprised me. "I was scared," she said finally. Everything was slipping. Bills, Daniel's business, the house. I felt like I was drowning. I listened. Not because I owed her that, but because I wanted to hear how she framed it now that the truth was out. "I didn't mean for it to go this far," she continued. "I just needed time. I thought if I could stabilize things, you'd understand later." "Stabilize by taking control," I said quietly. She winced. "I didn't think you'd notice." There it was, the assumption underneath everything. "You taught me to be practical," she said quickly, "to plan ahead, to protect my family." "I taught you to be honest," I replied. She looked down. "I was afraid." "So was I said. "The difference is I didn't lie about it." She reached for my hand, then stopped herself halfway. "I'm sorry," she said. "I really am. Can we just move past this?" Forgiveness sat between us like an object she expected me to pick up. I thought about the nights I'd lain awake, wondering if I was actually losing myself, about being escorted down hallways, about strangers deciding my future while my daughter looked away. "I believe you're sorry now," I said. Her shoulders relaxed. "But that doesn't mean I trust you," I continued. Her face fell. "I'm not cutting you out of my life," I said, "but things will be different. You don't make decisions for me, you don't speak for me, and you don't have access to my finances." "So that's it?" she asked. "You're punishing me forever." "No," I said, "I'm setting boundaries." She shook her head, frustrated, tears spilling over. "Families forgive. Families don't take each other's autonomy," I replied. We sat in silence for a long moment, then she stood. "I hope you know," she said, "I never wanted to hurt you." I believed that, but intent didn't erase impact. After she left, I packed, not everything, just what mattered: clothes, tools, books, a small box of things my wife had loved. Frank helped me load the car the next morning. "You sure?" he asked. I looked at the building behind me, the locked doors, the cameras, the quiet. "I'm ready," I said. The drive back to my house felt longer than it should have. When I pulled into the driveway, the porch light flicked on automatically, familiar, steady. I stood there for a moment, keys in hand, listening. No alarms, no footsteps, no voices rehearsing lies, just quiet. I unlocked the door and stepped inside. Home. As I set my bag down, I understood something clearly for the first time. Forgiveness wasn't denied, it was postponed until trust had a reason to return. And as I looked around the house that had recorded the truth when people wouldn't listen, I felt something settle in my chest. I was done negotiating my dignity. The next chapter of my life would be lived on my terms, and that was non-negotiable. I don't wander at night, I rest. The first night back home, I slept with the windows open, not because it was warm, but because I could. The house sounded the same as it always had, the soft tick of cooling pipes, the distant hum of a car passing on the main road, the occasional creak of wood settling into itself. Familiar sounds, honest sounds, no alarms, no footsteps checking on me, no clipboard waiting outside my door. In the morning I made coffee and stood on the porch, mug warm in my hands. The neighborhood hadn't changed. Same cracked sidewalk, same oak tree across the street. Frank waved from his driveway, coffee raised in salute. "You look good back where you belong," he called. "I feel better," I said. I checked the doorbell camera out of habit. The app opened instantly, clear video, clear audio. The porch was empty, quiet, exactly how I liked it. The camera was still there, still watching, not because I was afraid, but because I believed in records, in truth that didn't depend on memory or persuasion. Melissa didn't come by, she didn't call either. And for the first time, that absence didn't feel like a wound. It felt like space, space to think, space to live without anticipating someone else's next move. I settled into routine slowly. Morning walks, grocery runs, fixing the loose board on the porch step I'd ignored for years. Each small task felt like reclaiming territory, not from my daughter but from doubt. The nursing home sent paperwork confirming my discharge, formal language, quiet apologies. I filed it away and didn't look back. One afternoon, I sat in the living room sorting old photos. My wife smiled up at me from glossy paper, frozen in moments that felt closer than yesterday. I wondered what she would have said about all this. Probably something practical, probably something kind, definitely something honest. That evening the doorbell camera chimed. Motion detected. I glanced at my phone, just Frank's cat slipping across the porch like it owned the place. I laughed out loud, surprising myself. I thought about everything I'd been called in the past months: confused, vulnerable, at risk. Words used to shrink me, words used to hurry me out of my own life. None of them were true. Age hadn't taken my judgment, it hadn't erased my memory, it hadn't made me less deserving of respect. What it had given me was perspective. I understood now how easily people underestimated the quiet, how quickly they mistook patience for weakness, how dangerous it was to assume someone's story for them. The doorbell camera stayed on, not as a weapon, not as insurance. As a reminder, truth doesn't need permission, and dignity doesn't fade with age, it only becomes harder to steal. That night I locked the door, turned off the lights, and went to bed without fear of someone deciding my future while I slept. I didn't wander, I rested, because my voice was still mine, and I knew exactly when to use it. Growing old doesn't mean giving up your voice, it means choosing when to use it. Subscribe for more stories of truth, dignity, and justice.